All right, moving on to the next question. What should be done to prevent deforestation in Brazil? And this is merely an example of an overarching theme of basically what should the U.S.'s role in protecting the environment be globally. Obviously, there are many people who believe that scientifically that global warming is happening, and we need to make sure that we account for that in our country. But does foreign policy enter this discussion? Do we need to then talk to other countries and try to get them down? I mean, a lot of people talk about how China's production, we might be doing something, but if other countries don't do something, then it's not really going to make a difference.
Well, with that particular policy, I can say that the president in 2009 met at a summit in Copenhagen, and this was between the Prime Minister of Norway and then Brazilian officials. And basically, the president said that he's committed to doing whatever it takes to make sure that deforestation does not occur at a rapid rate. He wants to reduce the rate, and he also wants to make sure that we can restore the Amazon basin to its original state. He's committed, like I said, to making sure that the deforestation does not increase. Like I said, he's worked with the Prime Minister of Norway in Copenhagen and with Brazilian officials, and he wants to make sure that we have a much needed use, obviously, for ethanol in this country and for a lot of other resources, but we need to make sure that we save the resources in Brazil that we have, because it's going to be a race for alternative energy in the future. And I don't want to get into energy policy, but just on that particular issue, that's where the president stands.
I mean, there's certainly a tension on the one hand between wanting to achieve these global standards for reducing CO2, and preventing the deforestation of the Amazon, et cetera, that we all can agree on. But at the same time, there's something somewhat unfair about the United States dictating to Brazil how much it can develop and trying to limit that. I think the real issue with deforestation in Brazil isn't so much environmental as it is the forced migration of the native peoples that live in those areas. And if the United States is a signatory of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and people are being forcibly relocated and oftentimes dying in their long migration, that seems to me to be the actual issue, not the fact that a lot of trees are being cut down. Not to say that trees being cut down is not a terrible thing or that the environment should be protected, but if we're talking about the U.S. government's interest in this and not just American people's interest in forests, then I think it's really the people in Brazil that we have the duty to protect more so than the environment.
No, I agree with you. I don't think we're exactly dictating to other nations. We're not apologizing for anything. I think that what we're doing is we're working with the people to make sure that Brazilians curb their deforestation, and that way we're helping the Brazilian people. We're not dictating, saying this is our policy, go do it. We're working with them to help curb their efforts.
You said we would do whatever it takes. That's a pretty broad.
That's just what the president said.
So all right, so if we're going to do whatever it takes, and what if Brazil comes back and says, all right, what it takes is several $100 billion to supplant the lack of economic growth we have as a result of not developing these forests? Does the president then say, fine, here's the several $1 billion?
I can tell you that I know that I'm not an expert on this, and this hasn't been a hot topic during the campaign in 2012. I can just tell you that if you want the exact policy of what the president said, I can just read his statement. He hasn't really talked about it that much. And I think Governor Romney also agreed a little bit to the exact thing.
Certainly, I think it's fair to say that Governor Romney doesn't, he certainly wants to protect our environment. I think that any politician would say that. I mean, it's political suicide not to, I think. But,
so they don't.
But I think the important issue here, like you were saying, I think the important issue is that if you read our Constitution, America's responsibility when it comes to foreign issues is whether or not the overall well-being and if there's an American threat towards America. And I don't necessarily think that deforestation in Brazil is a major threat to America. And so I think this is one of those issues, like you said, that should be kept to the Brazilians, and America shouldn't really meddle in it.
Well, what I think we can say is that neither president, we're talking about the larger issues like Copenhagen carbon emissions, like neither president, neither individual would sign any treaty to limit ourselves to carbon emissions, because what's the number one issue right now is jobs, and there's no way they're going to tie themselves to universal limitation on what we produce in China and India, and other major competitors don't do the same. And so it may be a difference in theory of what one would like to do versus what the other one would like to do, but in practice they're going to do the exact same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very accurate assessment. No, neither is going to do anything. And I think really, there's not, to be honest, there's not much that you can do. Like there are, from more of an economic analysis of common pool resource problems. Basically, what classic economics tells us is that until we can define property rights over common pool resources such as air quality and just general global environment temperatures, we're not going to have any way to really improve the situation that's not going to cost us significantly economically as well as on the civil liberties front. So there's going to be a lot of conflicting. There will be a lot of conflicting rights until we get the technology to be able to define property rights. And so I don't know. I don't think that it's really. I mean, I guess it's sort of a political question right now because we're approaching we have some issues in this area. But I really my hope is that eventually we find the technology to be able to define property rights over larger common pool resources. And just really quick, one great example was grazing land back in the American frontier western times. They could never, all these cowboys would have all of their herd of cattle on the rangeland, and they would all go and muddy up the water, eat all the good grazing, and there were all these problems, and so they had fights between the cowboys, and no one ever thought that this would be able to be resolved. It was a big common pool resource problem. Everyone was polluting the general area, and it wasn't working out. But then what solved the problem was that barbed wire was invented, and so you could define the property rights and keep the cattle in. And so I think that rather than going for a political magical solution, I think we need to wait for technology to catch up to the reality.
Do you have anything that you want to say?
Yeah, well, I'm certainly not an expert on environmental issues, and I don't want to pretend that I am, but I did read an article in Foreign Affairs over the summer that
But I did say holiday.
but I would like to bring up, because I'm not a candidate campaigning for office, so I feel comfortable in saying that I think there's a trend currently, this sort of like environmental alarmism, where I think a lot of people like to sort of inject fear, and we have this idea that this goes back to like Thomas Malthus and stuff like that the world is going to end and we can't sustain ourselves and like we're all doomed, which is not to say that the environment isn't very important and we should be working on finding a solution to some of these very critical problems. But I think particularly for this election, I think a lot of what and this is what this article by Bjorn Lomborg pointed out, is that it leaves out human ingenuity and our ability to sort of come up with alternatives or come up with better ways, more efficient production techniques that'll help us sort of use our resources more efficiently. So I think just in general, for anyone who is watching and is concerned about the environment, I'm sorry, it's probably not going to be addressed too much in this campaign. And I think we can all just like take a breath and realize that we can address this maybe when other things have been sorted out.